Hey, awesome. How are you?
Hey, hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, it's good to meet you. Thanks for
Yeah,
doing
good to
this.
see you. Yeah, of course. No, thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited.
Awesome. Um, yeah, this is real casual, so just a kind of chance to talk about your portfolio and the class a little bit, and
Yeah, sure.
any kind of hurdles you feel like you're facing in terms of moving forward that I can potentially help with would be great.
Yeah.
Um, so tell me your situation again. You just finished school, is that right?
Yep, I just finished last Tuesday was my last
Awesome.
day. Yeah,
Cool,
so
congratulations.
thank you.
So you graduated, and what'd you study? You studied uh,
Studio art.
studio art, okay.
Yeah.
And
So
at Capital.
I started out in art ed, but I just didn't
Okay.
feel like Capital was preparing me, so
Okay.
I decided to go with my own art and maybe
Okay.
teach later if I want to.
Okay. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Um, and you were saying that you were looking basically at two different kinds of things, potentially looking for teaching jobs, and then there was a specific artist league, basically of
Yeah.
Columbus or something like that. Is it okay?
Yeah, so the Columbus Arts Festival has a Young Emerging Artist program, and
Okay.
they every year like have people submit work, like young artists, and they pick a couple and they like help you set up your tent and everything for like the Columbus
Okay.
Arts
Cool.
Festival.
Yeah, I used to go. We used to. I'm from Columbus, so I used to go to that all the time, a long time ago. But
Yeah,
I think my family still does. I've brothers who still live there. My dad still lives there, but they go to the jazz festival and they go to the arts festival pretty
yeah,
consistently. So,
yeah.
so cool. So you'd be hoping to like sell work then, basically at that. Okay. Um, so how, in terms of the actual online course, how far have you gotten? Have you taken, had you had time to do much of it, or
I've mostly just listened to your live things
okay,
and kind of taken notes and taken my steps from there and kind
okay,
of taken ideas from that and kind of created
okay.
these from those.
Cool. No, that's fine. Yeah. Again, definitely explore the course a little bit. Again, you'll have access for it for as long as it survives, or as long as it goes. Um, and it basically covers in a little bit more depth the things that I kind of talked about during the live stuff overall. But um, and the main thing too is have you had a chance to do much research into the either of those opportunities? Have you like in terms of the
Yeah,
arts?
so I looked
Okay.
into the Young Emerging Artist program
Okay.
a lot. So
Okay. So when applying for that, what kinds of things do you need to consider?
um, they want. Sorry, I'm like
It's
getting a
okay.
little sick. So
Me too.
uh,
Yeah. Sorry.
it's that time of year.
Exactly.
They want you to submit only 4 pieces of work.
Okay.
So I was like, that's kind of hard to like narrow things down that way.
Sure.
Let me see, I can pull it up real quick. I have it saved. Let's see. Detailed information. Yeah, so they want 4 specific pieces that display
Okay.
your work the best that you would be exhibiting.
Okay.
Um, in addition, okay. And then it just says that you would apply through a Zapplication, which is an online tool for the digital images,
Okay.
and then it'll be done by a blind juror.
A blind juror. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so that's no, that's a good starting point. Again, so what I would recommend, and we'll talk. We can kind of project forward a little bit, but how, what kind of work have they shown in the past? It's a pretty large event, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of hard because it like varies. So I feel like a lot of the booths though like kind of have their own specific like theme to their own
Okay.
things. So like there's a lot of like photography, and so some of the photography might be like strictly portraits, or some might be strictly like landscapes.
Okay.
There's a lot of cityscape painters.
Okay.
There's some like crafts and things like that. Some like strictly ceramic things. There's some very like imaginative booths, so like they have very like imaginative like work, or there's some like very abstract work where they're like strictly like abstract artists.
Okay. Cool.
Like that.
So it's relatively diverse then in terms
Yeah.
of the type of work shown and the mediums and things like that. Okay. Um, And your intent in terms of participating in this event is to sell work, or is it just kind of get your name out, or is it a combination of all of that?
Yeah, a combination of all of that. I would love to
Okay.
be able to sell work and kind of just like know in what direction I want to like keep taking my work to like work into getting there.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, cool. Um, well, that's a good starting point. Again, it can be a little opaque sometimes, and
Mhm.
I think that it's again, I mentioned this in the course. I probably mentioned it at live events too. One of the biggest errors that again artists make or creatives make in general is that they don't think about again their why or why they're doing this stuff or their purpose in terms of the portfolio,
Mhm.
and they don't do their client research. And that's true with again if people think of like client research, well that's just for designers and like or commercial artists. It's really not true because you're always going to be looking for something, whether again it's acceptance to a program like this or a job or to sell work, any of that.
Right.
um, so it's really really important to kind of cater towards what they want.
Mhm.
And if that's opaque, one of the best things you can do is just to kind of see who's shown on these events in the past and to
Right.
see what kind of work that is. If there is a cohesiveness to any of that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just describe the kinds of art that they're looking for, and if I remember correctly, that event is very diverse. It's a little crafty, but there are some serious sort of fine artists as well, and a
Yeah.
lot of photography. I do remember that as well. But even the photography was relatively traditional and like
Yeah.
again a lot of landscapes and
Yeah.
traditional kinds of stuff that has a little bit more of a commercial bent. Has the kind of stuff that people would want to put over their couch as opposed to
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
having a Chelsea show or something like that. So
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of trying to figure out. I'm like, which way should I like take my direction of my work, to be able to kind of appeal to
yeah,
everyone, but also still it be my work, you know?
yeah, that's tough. That's always the challenge, and I think it's important to kind of separate it sometimes, and that the balance between kind of having a viable sort of financial existence and doing your own work in a more it's kind of a lot of times they just call it like academic where you're doing it for your own exploration and your own uh, kind of experimentation in some ways or your own personal growth. That's
Right.
very different than providing work for someone else to solve someone else's problems. And the
Yeah.
challenge is that there's a lot of times there's not a whole lot of overlap.
Yeah.
So you can do your thing, which is great. You should do it. But I think a lot of times artists especially get upset because then there's nobody else wants it because it's so
Yeah.
specific. It's their own thing, and they're uh, basically dismembered Raggedy Ann doll piece doesn't sell, and they're upset with that. And like, well,
Yeah.
why? Again, they don't even know who their audience is really. So I think it's important to kind of segregate that a little bit in terms of your practice, or at least segregate your expectations. Um, it's a little tough to do sometimes, but again, it's healthy to do a little bit of both. So you do your personal work, and then you support that personal work through whatever means you have to do that, and that could include creating commercial pieces, or it could include other kinds of again teaching art or teaching art ed or any of that kind of stuff as well. So, well, you've got a really good start. Again, it looks like you edited this down quite a bit already. I'm assuming you've made more than 13 pieces over the last few years, but
Yeah. Yeah.
okay. No, but we can still talk about it. We can still start. It's good. And I think you've got a lot to work with. And I'll sort of talk about some of the things and we'll focus on the event first. With the art teaching thing, it's going to be very, very different.
Yeah.
And that's something you really, really need to do your research in terms of what they're looking for.
Right.
Did you get a chance in school to even like teach kids or
Um,
to work with kids or K through 12 kids making art at all?
yeah, I got to observe a little bit, and then
Okay.
I went to Miami University for a semester, so I got to actually work with some elementary student kids, and I have some
Okay.
pictures of the work that
You
I
have some
did.
of the good, good. That's what I was going to ask. Is that uh, again, if you document your students' work, that becomes a portfolio as well, which a lot of times, especially in our education contexts, is can be very important.
Right.
Just to kind of show the progress and the themes that you are working with, and
Right.
that can be super super valuable for a hiring committee.
Right.
Um, Probably more so than even personal work, although it totally depends on the organization and
Yeah.
the committee and what they're looking for. But so today we'll kind of focus on the other thing, the studio oriented kind of stuff, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Um, and it seems, I mean, for me, it seems like you've got a lot to work with. But I'll kind of talk about um, again. I always talk about segregating your conception of work versus the portfolio, but there is a lot of overlap, obviously.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of talk a little bit about the work itself, but also more importantly, how the portfolio might kind of come together. And um, So tell me a little bit about your work. Tell me a little about the stuff that you're doing, the stuff that you sort of feel drawn to. What do you feel is strong, or what's the direction you feel like you're kind of heading already?
Okay, so I feel like I kind of draw in the direction of abstraction a little more, but I do like to
Okay.
do some figural things a little bit.
Hmm.
I'm very drawn to like kind of the like outer space kind of like Starry Night kind of things.
Sure.
Really like a lot of colors, a lot of vibrant colors lately. So the black and gold are my like most current pieces, and I really have
Okay.
been drawn to this like honeycomb aspect of like life, and like saving the bees, and how those kind of pertain to like our life, and keeping us
Okay.
alive, things like
Okay.
that.
So
And
this
then I've done,
is these two
you go.
are kind of some of the more recent pieces.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And then I've done some experimentation with like pour painting since that was like really fun. So the blue kind of splattered
Hmm.
pour, and then the
Hmm.
black and white with the gold background
Okay.
is pour paint also. And I kind of wanted to do them in like a very untraditional like pour paint kind of way. See how I could
Okay.
like transform those into more fine art than a craft.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So did I hear right? You said war paint, like or
Pour,
pour paint.
Pour.
Oh, you pour it out. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I see. So it's the process basically in terms of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Um, no, I think those are both actually really interesting kind of pieces. It's cool.
Yeah.
Um, I'll sort of talk about the series or the things that I think kind of stand out in terms of the sophistication of it. Again, it's all very nice stuff. Um, this the dolly pieces and stuff is interesting, but it's probably a little less interesting than some of the more abstract stuff.
Right.
When you say moving towards abstract, it seems like that. I would say that the more exploratory kind of abstract pieces that bridge a little bit between sort of figurative or representational kinds of work and abstraction, I
Yeah.
think are the ones that are the most interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that we could probably put those together, especially if it's only four pieces. I think you've got some stuff to work with. But you could even, do you have a deadline you're working with this, or is it?
Not right now. So the
Okay.
Emerging Artist Program, I think the deadline was in November. So I'm
Okay.
kind of thinking like this year since I'm done with school to kind of really
Hmm.
prepare myself a whole year in
Okay.
advance to kind of just keep making work to
Okay.
be able to apply for it.
Awesome. Um, so I think, tell me a little bit about this piece right here.
So this was a piece that I did my sophomore year of college actually, and we
Okay.
experimented with the inkjet printer. You can print pieces of like clear acetate. You print onto them, and then there's
Okay.
a solution that you add to the canvas.
Hmm.
And then mine didn't actually come out very well, so the images kind of were torn. And then I
Okay.
kind of took oil paint and just painted over it, and kind of went from there to make it an abstract piece.
Okay. So it's almost like an alternative photographic process that you turned into an oil painting then.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Um, and this is a more traditional kind of abstract oil painting, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay, with some sort of organic influence going on. Cool. Um, and tell me a little bit about this one here.
This one's an acrylic painting, and I kind of took there's like these images that our teacher had of just these like shadow figures, and they had different
Okay.
backgrounds and stuff. But I kind of took those figures and kind of blended them into my own background that I made of my own like colors and different things.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think again you've got some interesting direction here. So again, even if you've got some time to work,
Hmm. Yeah.
um, you're thinking basically you'll probably. I mean, you don't have to have a definitive answer, obviously, but right now you're being more drawn to kind of the abstract exploration of things and the
Yeah.
pouring paint and the focus on the medium and things like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think those are definitely the most interesting kinds of things. I think you've got a couple different bodies of work here. I'm just going to actually clarify this. Again, some of this stuff is nice. It's more narrative.
Yeah.
It's about very direct kind of storytelling in some ways. This kind of bridges the gap a little bit, but
Mhm.
uh, I don't think it works quite as well with some of this other stuff. This is kind of a bridge piece as well, where you're doing a little bit of both.
Yeah.
You could obviously, we'll kind of sequence this just to get them. They'll start to come together a little bit here, in terms of the sort of space-oriented
Mhm.
kinds of things. You could play around with that a little bit, but again, this is even very different than this, where you're starting to play around a little bit more abstract and a little bit more intense color, whereas this is direct storytelling.
Yes. Yeah.
direct narrative kinds of things. So because this is so different, I would probably eliminate actually all three of actually these three for sure.
Yeah.
At least for what we're doing today.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Let me see. Um, and then you've got some of this more abstract stuff. Again, this is kind of a bridge piece, but I think it qualifies more as abstract, even though it's much more organic than some of these. And then this is kind of an interesting one as well. Again, this is a pretty literal interpretation of things, but I like some of the abstraction of the figure again, which you're playing with.
Yeah.
Which is nice, and it kind of works, but it's a little bit on its own too. So I probably would just for now we'll do that. Okay. And again, this is just an example, just to kind of show you my process or my mindset a little bit. Yeah. So don't take this as like formulaic and be like, yeah. It's just sort of just to experiment and play around with like what kind of works together with what. Not just aesthetically, but also conceptually too. I think it's really important to kind of experiment a little bit in terms of the balance of any of that. So again, this is a little bit more narrative, but it starts to become more trippy, sort of like, again, figure in space, Mother Earth kinds of content, which relates quite a bit to this too, in terms of, again, maybe sun god or mythology oriented, which then I think relates to this as well, in that kind of way. To me, this is less about honey, even though the shapes are about honey, and it's more about the figure, like in space with abstraction a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is fine. You could even play around with that a little bit. It's more, to me, reads as again, that sort of stickiness or that visceral kind of fluid on a human body, which can head in all kinds of different directions. And actually relates a little bit to this too, in terms of, again, figure being surrounded or drowned in or covered with sort of organic color and texture and shape and things like that, which is kind of an interesting direction. You could probably push that even if you wanted to. So those actually, even though it's space stuff, probably go better together in various kinds of ways than even this, which I probably would go ahead and do that.
Yeah, no.
And then so it gets down to, again, kind of picking a direction in terms of what interests you the most. To me, just personally, this is probably the strongest piece.
Okay, thank you.
For a couple of different reasons. And part of it is that I think it sort of bridges that gap between the pure abstraction.
Yeah.
But there's a narrative sort of haunting element to it that I think always happens when you have sort of abstract figures.
Yeah.
Again, whereas these are pretty representational.
Right.
Whereas this starts to really bleed into this kind of ethereal, hidden demon zombie, maybe, or maybe it's something more positive. Like it could be a heaven thing, or it could be all kinds of narrative, or it could just be sort of an abstract sequence of things.
Right.
Which I think is really kind of interesting. To see you kind of play around with that a little bit. And it might be something you could even start to combine process-wise with the floor painting.
Yeah.
I gotta definitely encourage you to keep exploring this, because these are really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Just in terms of an abstract level. And again, this even starts to become a little bit of that as well. These start to become figures in some ways.
Yeah.
Especially if you start to contextualize it like this a little bit. This figure and this over here start to echo one another kind of an interesting way, which, by the way, also echoes some of these figures.
Right. Yeah.
Which, again, this is really close to this, actually, in some ways. It's a little bit more on the side of abstraction.
Right.
It's a little more opaque, but that's not a bad thing.
Right.
It's a little more mysterious, I guess, is probably a better word.
Yeah.
So again, these two work very, very well together. And this is kind of in between a little bit as well. This is a little bit more like this one.
Right. An organic.
Just, organic sort of, regardless of process.
Right.
You have some really beautiful stuff going on here, which is interesting. and I just want to see more of it. But again, it's also this organic kind of sea anemone, is that how you pronounce it? I
Yeah.
can't remember.
Yeah.
Um, thing, which is very similar to this too. It almost looks like it could be underwater or a sea creature. So
Right.
again, but the interesting part of it is that you're sort of really bridging sort of the representational with the purely abstract.
Right.
I think in a way that is really interesting. So so just for kids, let's do that. I really like the direction of that series. If you look at my personal website, like I'm all about destruction of figure and the
Yeah.
morphing of the figure and the sort of psychology that kind of goes into that. So I definitely encourage you to explore that if that interests you. But I think with this stuff, you're starting to get a little stronger.
Yeah.
And it would be really interesting to see. Are you familiar with like Kara Walker's work or any of that? Like,
I think so. That sounds really familiar.
okay, yeah, look up Kara Walker again. It's very different. It's very specific. It's very narrative, but it uses again very stark kind of figurative
Okay. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
things. Mostly the one she was most famous for, I think, is we talked about the Antebellum South, and then uh, was very narrative sort of storytelling. It's
Yeah.
about it becomes about deeper, broader things, even though the actual figures start to be a little cartoonish. But it's
Right.
super amazing work. It's super famous work. But this could again, it kind of references that a little bit in kind of an interesting way. But so you've got a really really good story. If you had to pick today for the 4, just for cohesion sake,
Yeah.
again, I would, even though I love that, I would probably go with these 4
Those.
because
Okay.
there's a cohesion to it, despite the kind of the similarity of color schemes. That's
Right.
okay, and what comes across is an intent. What
Yeah.
comes across is an interest in abstraction and also bridging that kind of uh, gap
Okay.
between abstraction and more figurative kinds of stuff.
Okay.
But they're each interesting in their own way.
Yeah.
And the awesome thing is that when it comes to abstract painting in particular, there is all kinds of markets for that because it's, even though you don't intend it to be decorative,
Yeah.
it can be very easily perceived as
Yeah.
decorative.
That's
So
what a lot of people like.
sometimes it can be a very easy sale, to be honest, compared to um, say more political work or more very specific kind of representational kind of work as well. Not that that should be the motivation, but it's a nice overlap.
Yeah.
So you could see people hanging that over a couch if you needed to within
Right.
any of that. So does that make sense in terms of any of
Does.
it? Again,
Yeah.
this is one particular edit that you could take or leave, but just in terms of the thought process a little bit.
Yeah, that honestly helps so much just to like hear like that thought process and kind of like where things relate and different kind of ways that people will look at it. That definitely helps a lot.
Yeah, and I think this is, again, it's very sophisticated stuff. It's nice. And it shows a little bit of experimentation. And
Yeah.
that's another contextual thing too, is that if it's young artists, they may not be totally expecting super cohesive bodies of work, to be honest.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it needs to be super broad.
Right.
Like you're not like applying for school. You're applying for something that's more real world or more specific than that. But I think with any of this kind of stuff, you could probably, again, if you've got some time, continue to make work, obviously, but experiment with the floor painting, experiment with the pouring, experiment with the medium as much as you can, but also just remember as you make stuff to think in terms of, it's really good to experiment and again, just play around and stuff, but try not to get too caught up in tools or in process. It balance that with, again, more idea-based kinds of things. Even if it's kind of after the fact, and the ideas can be about process, that's fine. But just be honest about that. Just be authentic about it. I think a lot of times, and I've certainly been guilty of this on occasion, but people will kind of experiment with a medium or experiment with a technique and then be like, oh, well, this actually has all kinds of meaning because of X, Y, and Z. And it's really about politics. And it really quickly becomes really evident that you're just making stuff up.
Right.
Whereas if you say, listen, I was exploring this kind of technique and here's what I learned and here's some of the direction that I was heading or some of the sort of idea-based stuff that I was practicing.
Right.
Don't hesitate to be honest about that.
Yeah.
Whether you're writing about it, whether you're speaking about it, any of that, because, and it's also okay to say you don't know, to say it was an organic kind of process that you were experimenting with, and then always kind of follow up with, this is what I learned, this is what I would do differently. This is the kind of stuff that might be coming next,
Yeah.
and that can be a super useful kind of conversation to have,
Okay.
regardless of context. Again, whether it's talking to someone at your booth or if it's being interviewed to be included in the show or any of that, just because again, people are going to understand if you're making stuff up.
Right.
That's a pet peeve of mine, is that when they get in there and they want to argue with you about the fact that this was really about some weirdly specific thing that obviously it had nothing to do with. But,
Right.
so do you have any questions? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said definitely have heard people do that in class before.
Oh yeah, it's really common. And it's always one or two people that do it. It's like where their thoughts are so important, and it's unfortunately the reason I discourage that is because it shuts down conversation,
Yeah.
as opposed to opening up conversation. And part of it's just systemic, that classes tend to,
Yeah.
or instructors in classes have a bad habit of kind of promoting that
Kind of.
approach a lot of times. And so if you get a really good instructor, then sometimes they prevent that, or keep the thing on track a little bit, or more open. But definitely experiment. And again, just make so much work as much as you can.
Yeah, my plan was.
And this stuff will emerge in ways that you don't even recognize, that aren't even necessarily intentional.
Yeah.
But always try to balance that kind of purpose, again, even just in making work as well as the portfolio. So which is good. So do you have any questions about any of that, or any of what I talked about?
Just one more question about, so if I were to do like an art education portfolio, I know they would want to see like student work and stuff like that, but if they were wanting to see my work, I know it would be a lot more based on like research and stuff. But say they wanted just a variety of my work, would I show like different mediums that I could do, or?
It really is going to depend. So some good questions those are the kinds of questions you want to ask in terms of their hiring practices, because it's going to be very, very, very different in terms of what they're looking for. Depending on the kind of sort of teaching opportunity, sometimes there's going to be a huge overlap between personal work and what they're looking for. They want to see where you showed, and the galleries and the group shows that you're in, and it's more about your CV a little bit than it is even about the portfolio. And the portfolio needs to back that up. But that's one of those areas that the portfolio may become a little less relevant. I talk a lot about degrees becoming less and less important and the portfolio sticking out. But in academia, there is a little bit of an exception to that. Actually, there's a big exception. I would argue because they're trying to perpetuate their own bad system, but that's just my take on it. So they need you to have the degree that they offer so that you can get a job working for them, that kind of a thing. But that is honestly the case. So you need, again, whether it's teaching in higher ed, and K through 12 is very specific, where you really need to, depending on the state, do all kinds of hoops and hurdles and things to be able to do that. If it's more independent kind of thing, if you want to teach people because they like your work, then you're going to want to keep it more personal. If it's teaching younger students, then there's going to be a combination of that. Again, it's good that you've documented the work with any of that, but be sure to just continue to do that. And it's going to be, they may want diversity, but they also, again, depending, want to see a little bit of cohesion, not necessarily of medium, but of thought. Of idea. So if you're focused on abstraction, if you're focused on, again, whether it's through photography or through painting or through anything, what's interesting about that is that it's not about medium. Again, those fundamental ideas can be articulated in all kinds of mediums and in all kinds of ways. And to see that exploration sometimes is really good. So again, at Pratt, one of the things that I used to really like from students was that they would have a singular kind of interesting idea or concept that they were super fixated on or super obsessed with. And it could be about process, or it could be about more personal kinds of ideas or political ideas or any of that. But if they took that really interesting question or that really interesting idea and did photography and painting and drawing and combined those things and appropriated stuff and really experimented to see what was most effective in terms of exploring that idea, that was a really nice way to sort of have a balance of cohesive idea, but exploration of different kinds of mediums, which, again, in an educational context, signified really positive things, because it showed a focus, but also an openness to approach
Okay.
that in an educational context, a lot of times can be very, very valuable. So I don't know if that answers that question.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
you're gonna have to do your research again, figure it out. Look at the kind of stuff that they say they're looking for, but also look at the kind of stuff that uh, not just in terms of the visual stuff, but also the intellectual and professional kinds of credentialing that you may have to sort of accentuate during that job search process.
Right.
And again, even just there's such a huge, huge difference between even just higher ed, K through 12, sort of finding jobs and finding work and that kind of thing. So, and then to do it independently, which is probably a really good thing to investigate, even just if it's to teach whatever age group, is it helps to have a really strong kind of voice, so that people who like your work are going to want to learn from you, and learn the things that you are probably going to continue to learn, but also offer, again, not just on a technical level, but also on a creative and kind of intellectual level as well. So,
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, that does.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Awesome. So just, yeah, no, we can kind of wrap it up here if that's okay, but hopefully it's useful. What else? So what are you nervous about, like for the year looking forward, or professionally now that you're graduated? Or what's causing you the most stress or anxiety?
Just like looking for jobs. I'm not really sure like which direction I want to take it. Right now I work at the Pizzuti Collection in the North, but I just work the front desk. But I want to move up. I want to do more things. But they just merged with the CMA, and right now the CMA doesn't really have any jobs that they're kind of looking for. So I'm kind of looking maybe towards the teaching direction, and maybe going back and getting a licensure to teach. Maybe if I want to do that, and just kind of looking at what's out there right now.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's
it's super stressful. I know, it's crazy. It's one of those times where there's never been more opportunities, but it's also much less secure in various kinds of ways, where you have to be a little creative and do about 14 different things at once, to be honest. Well, that sounds good. That sounds like a good kind of option. And you're going to stay in Columbus if you can.
Yeah, for now.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Very cool. Well, awesome. Well, if you have any other questions at all, if I can help some more, let me know. Again, thanks for joining our Nerd Society. Just be involved with that. There's a lot of awesome people in there. It's not quite as noisy as I would like it to be, but hopefully that'll keep growing.
Oh, yeah.
And tell people about it if you can. Tell people about the course if you can. And definitely delve into the course. Again, it's going to answer it's going to bridge a lot of the gaps between the kind of conceptual kinds of stuff as well as the more technical kinds of things, which should hopefully be useful for you, I think. So, and definitely let me know if you need help in any other kind of way in the future, for sure. Okay.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thanks for showing me your work. It's really good. I'll be curious to see it in 6 months.
Yeah.
So let me know. Put it up on our Nerd Society for me, and let me know. Let everybody know actually what you're working on or what you're struggling with. And as always, if you have questions, let me or let the community know. Yeah. And we'll see where it takes us. So.
Yeah, I love this. Thank you so much for doing all this. Yeah.
Yeah, really my pleasure. Yeah. Great. Well, it's good to meet you, Larissa. Yeah, we'll hopefully talk again soon. So.
Okay.
All right. Bye.